And we are live. Welcome, Dr. Gary Sprouse. I'm very happy to have you. Excited to share, to listen to your story and share with other people. To
Well,
kick
Andre,
off,
thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
yeah, amazing. To kick off, even before you introduce yourself, I love to start with this question. This week, this month, basically in your life right now, what is it like to be you?
Well, so it's changed. So I've been a primary care physician for 38 years, actually 39 years now.
Wow.
And in December of last year, I retired. So what it means to be me has changed a lot. I went from working 6 and 7 days a week, 12 hours a day,
Wow.
to not working at all. So but that transition from working to retire has gone well because I've switched from being a physician with a stethoscope and a prescription pad to being an author and a self-help person to help people. So I get to do some of the same kinds of things, like I help people have less stress, but now I don't have to write notes about it, and I don't have to get malpractice, and I don't have my board worrying about me. And it's like, so it's made my life way easier.
Mm, okay. So, what how did you decide that after retirement you want to help people with stress and anxiety and do
Well,
this kind of
while I
work?
was a physician, I had all these patients coming to me that were saying, Dr. Sprouse, I'm really stressed out. They would come in and say,
Mm,
I worry that I worry too much. And I was like, well, then that's probably true. You probably do worry too much. And so when I was looking at how, as a physician, you
mm,
tend to write prescriptions for people. I was like, yeah, that's not the best way to do it. And when I looked into it, if I sent somebody to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, there was a 75% chance that they wouldn't go. So I was
wow.
like, if I'm going to send somebody to a psychologist, I'm going to either assume that three-quarters of them aren't actually going to go, or I can learn how to do this myself. And so I figured out, you know what? I already know the medical side of this. I'm going to start learning the psychological side. So I did a lot of reading and some courses, and then I had my own insight into where our stresses are coming from, and that's what prompted me to write a book called Highway to Your Happy Place: A Roadmap to Less Stress. And the insight that I got was that, I'd had patients come in and they would lose their spouse, and it was devastating to them. And when you read the books on stress, what they talk about is losing a spouse is like the number one stress. And I'm like, but what makes it so stressful? That's what's critical, right? So when I started looking into it, and as a physician, I'm used to writing a prescription that says, hey, here's a medicine for your diabetes. It's a great medicine, has all these benefits, but it can have a couple side effects. So when I turned that model into our brain and our brain skills, what I realized is the majority of human stresses are actually side effects to our brain skills. So what that means is, like, we have the amazing ability to envision the future. Like, we can talk about, hey, what's going to happen in an hour? What are we going to do next week? What's going to happen when I retire? Right? That kind of stuff. The side effect is that we have to worry about it. And so most today psychologists will say, well, just live for today. And you're like, well, that's an awesome suggestion. That certainly gets rid of worry, but it also gets rid of your skill of envisioning the future. And so what I wanted to say is like, no, 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 no. We need that skill of envisioning the future. It's amazing. So how do we keep the skill and get rid of the side effects? And so that's what prompted me writing the book. And so I ended up writing the chapters are about worry and guilt and regret and boredom and low self-esteem and feeling overwhelmed. But and when I did all that, I would say to patients, "Hey, look, I'm writing this book on how to have less stress." And every single patient said, "Oh, I need that book." And I'm like, "Yeah, I bet, right? We all
Mhm.
need that book." But then I said, I came to the second question. I say, "Well, if you didn't have so much stress, where would you be?" And they were like, I don't know. I never really got that far. I only got to the part about only wanting to have less stress. And you're like, yeah. So that prompted me to start writing about, well, where are we trying to get to when we have less stress? And that was where I came up with this idea of a happy place. And it's like,
Mm,
yeah. And so what I realized was everybody has this sort of like minimal idea of what their happy place is. They envision themselves on the beach, or they see of themselves in Vietnam, or or they're at a mountain lake or something like that. But that's about as far as it gets. And when I started exploring, I was like, wait, everybody's happy place has the same rooms. Now they decorate them differently, so they all look different, but the rooms are all the same. And so I started making this list of what makes up a happy place and the rooms that are in there. And it came up with this incredible list. And when you get in, when you realize what the rooms are, well, now you can go, oh, well, I can get there. So it's filled with things like contentment and gratitude and fulfillment and things like that. That's something I can teach you about. But what I realized was, okay, here's our happy place. And I think we were meant to be there. But then you realize there's all these things that are keeping us from there. And that's where the stresses come in. And so what I would say then is, look, here's your happy place. Here's where we're trying to get to. And these are the things that are getting in the way. So let's figure out how to keep our skills, lose the side effects, and then we'll spend all our time in our happy place. Yay. Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm okay. There's a lot of things that you said that are very interesting to me. One is you said a lot of people. Okay, actually, let me start here. As a physician who also now has the insights into helping people with stress and all of this, would you say that stress caused some of the physical symptoms that people were experiencing, and that like mental stress has effects on the body itself?
Absolutely. So there's a great book that if your audience wants, it's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's about 300 pages of what happens to your body when you're under too much stress. And what I'll summarize it in that we all have this fight, flight, or freeze in our body, right? So
Mm,
if lion shows up, we go ah, and our body instantly, we don't have to think about it. We instantly go into this, fear mode.
mm-hmm,
But once, so zebra does the same thing. So they smell a lion, they're like ah, and they go into fear mode and they all run away. But once they run away and they can't sense the lion anymore, then their fear reaction goes down and stops, and they go back to eating grass. But humans, and again, because we have our future, we'll get to a new field where there's no lion, but we're like, oh my gosh, what would happen if the lion came back? What would happen
mm,
if I had a leg and I couldn't run? And so because we can think, we can start reacting to our ideas. So our fear reaction can go on and on and on. And there's nothing to make it stop because all I have to do is think lion and my fear reaction goes off. So what you realize is that fear reactions were designed to get you away from a lion and then stop. But for humans, it just persists and goes on forever. And it's like here's what I say to people: like you can drive your car at 120 miles an hour or 150 kilometers an hour
mm-hmm.
for a while, but after you do that too long and it starts breaking down, and that's exactly what happens to the body. So your body starts breaking down,
Oh,
and there's all kinds of things that happen, like your heart problems, skin problems, lung problems. There's a lot of evidence now showing that immune problems start happening. Like people are more likely to get autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. The other one that was that I found interesting was that in our genes, at the end of our genes is this little cap that's supposed to prolong them. But when you're stressed out, the cap starts wearing down. And so it actually takes 10 years off your life because of the caps that are getting worn down in your genes. And you're like, wait, what? Who, where? Yeah. So, yeah, lots and lots of things happen when you start running your system way too long.
mm, okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. I like the analogy that if you just run it too long, it just starts breaking down. Another thing that you said was that about 75% of people who you would send to a psychiatrist or send to like mental health specialist, they wouldn't go. Why do you think that is? Like, why do so many people,
Wow,
even if they are
this is
recommended?
yeah, I get it. Well, because I think what happens is, and this is my guess,
Yeah.
that patients there's a certain bias.
Mm,
So what separates us from other animals is our mind, right? So the skills of our mind, like we can think and we can have choice and we can look into the future and blah blah blah. So when people think that your mind isn't working right, that's scary. You're like, whoa, like that's what makes me human. That's what makes me me. And now you're saying I'm so messed up that I
mm,
need to see a special about that. And so they get nervous, they get afraid, they wonder what they feel weak, and so they don't want to admit that they have so much trouble that they need some help. So they go, yeah, I'm just not going to go. And then until they get like into disaster mode, then they go, all right, finally, like they go, I'm going to commit suicide. Dad goes, all right, you need to go see somebody, right? What I found was as a primary care doctor, people didn't mind coming to see me. So
Mm.
if you're at home and you go, hey, I got to go see a doctor today, and they go, oh, who are you seeing? You go, oh, I'm seeing the psychiatrist. Like, oh, what's the matter with you, right? Because there's this bias.
Mm.
If you say, hey, I'm going to go see my primary care doctor, they go, oh, okay, sure, that makes sense. So I was actually able to help people with their psychological problems because people were willing to come see me because they
Yeah.
didn't. There wasn't bias, there wasn't the stigma, there wasn't all that other stuff going on playing into it. Plus, it was more likely to be covered by insurance and those kinds of things because for whatever reason, psychiatric care has gotten sort of pushed off to the side of reimbursements, so it gets reimbursed
Mm.
differently than your primary care doctor does. So for all those reasons, I found it was better for me to learn how to do it. Plus, I had built up a long-term relationship with most of my patients. I've known some of my patients I've known for 35 years, right?
Mm.
And so they already trusted me. They already knew who I was. They'd already told me their story. I already knew what was going on with them. So then it was just a matter of me getting more information so that I could help them get through whatever crisis they were in.
Yeah.
Not,
Okay.
and again, nothing wrong with psychology. I mean, I think psychologists, psychiatrists do a great job, and they're definitely needed. And we should try to work on getting rid of the stigma. But for now, that's just the way people are. So
Yeah. Okay. I think it's a pretty good guess, and I think if anybody would have a pretty accurate guess, it's gonna be you from 35 years of experience
mm,
as dealing with this. And I think you're pretty right. Like that's what I see as well as working in the mental health space for a while. Um, that a lot of people are kind of worried and scared, and there's a lot of the stigma. I think you described it perfectly with if you say that you're going to see your primary care doctor, people are like, oh, okay, it's normal. But then if maybe they will ask, oh, like, oh, you feel sick or whatever. But if you say you're going to see a physician, then they're going to be like, oh, what's wrong with you? And it's
yes,
kind of
exactly.
reinforced, like you want to hide it.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm, okay.
Well, the other thing here's the other thing I found was like, I've known a number of psychologists, and a lot of them are trained to sort of sit back and listen to the client, let them kind of run the figure it out on their own, basically, and you just
Yeah.
sort of guide. And as a primary care doctor, I'm used to saying, hey, you got high blood pressure, take this medicine, and here's why.
Yeah.
Much more matter of fact and much more concrete. And I'm very like I can as a physician, I consider myself a teacher. So when patients come in, I'm teaching them what high blood pressure is and
Yeah.
what we need, why we need to treat it. I'm treating them with here's what your heart does and here's how your heartbeat works and this is why it's messed up and this is what we're going to do to fix it, right? So when I'm dealing with people with their psychological problems, then I took that same approach was I'm like, okay, here's the problem. Here's what we're going to do to fix it. Here's what you can do, right? And here's why we're going to do it, blah, blah, blah. And so what I realized was this is kind of fascinating. When I would say to people, hey, tell me what worry is.
Mm.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell me what worry is.
I would say worry is fear about and thinking obsessively almost thinking about the future in a fearful way.
Yeah, well, you're one of the few that's pretty accurate, right? So most people go, oh, well, it's then they know exactly what it feels like, and they know they don't like it, but they do it a lot, and they can use it in a sentence. But it's like when you start trying to define it, they get in trouble. And so I go, well, how are you
Mm.
going to fix something that you're not even sure what it is? Did I lose me?
Oh,
Um, anyway,
you disappeared for some reason.
I'm missing my face. I don't know where it
Yeah,
went.
you,
So
you you disappeared for some reason. Maybe try and turn your camera off and on again. Maybe there's like a little issue with the
okay,
background that you have about your book.
there I am. Okay, that's
Yeah,
weird.
there you are.
Anyway, so yeah, so you were really close. I mean you got it on the right track. So what
Mhm.
it's first off, it's if we have this amazing skill that we can envision the future, but then people focus on the bad things that can happen. And then because they're focusing on something bad happening, they have a fear reaction right now. And so that fear reaction can go on and on and on. It can wake you up at 2 o'clock in the morning. It can interrupt your dinner meal. It can, interrupt whatever you're doing because that fear, as soon as you think about something, bang, the fear goes off. And people would say, well, just don't think about it. Well, if I said to you, don't think about elephants, the first thing you do is think about an elephant, right? So it's like, that doesn't work. And so when you look at fear, when you look at worry and you define it in concrete terms like that, then it gives you ways to fix it. So I have two tools that I talk about the most. So the first one is called realistic optimism. So one of the
Mm.
other skills that we have is choice. So I can choose to focus on the bad things that are happening, that could happen, or I can choose to focus on the good things. So if I choose to focus on the good things, that makes me feel good right now. Wait, what? Isn't that nice? So, but I call it realistic optimism because you can't live your life with rose colored glasses. Like you can't ignore that bad things can happen. So the key is that I can, my first tool is realistic optimism. So like I had one of my relatives and I both got audited by IRS, right? So our tax collector was going to audit our chart. I'm like, oh, everybody's, worries about that, right?
Yeah.
But I took this approach with my realistic optimism. I said, look, this is going to work out. I've been paying my taxes. I've got an accountant. I've done all the things by the book. I haven't been cheating. So this is going to work out. My relative was like, oh my God, he was pulling his hair out. He was drinking too much. He couldn't sleep. He was a mess for a year. And at the end of the
Wow.
year, because he was focusing on all the bad things that could happen, at the end of the year, we got a letter that said, hey, you owe us $10,000. You're like, whoa, that's a lot. But because I'd had a year of sleep and not worried and stressed less and things like that, I go, okay, well, I just got to figure out how to get $10,000. My relative was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Yeah, I'm exhausted. I don't know. Where am I going to get $10,000? Well, then the next day we got a letter. It's like, oh, we made a mistake. We actually owe you $10,000, right? So then I'm going, yay. So like my whole year, I'm like, yes, I thought this was going to work out, and it did. My relative, who now has $10,000 in his pocket, is miserable because he spent a year freaking out. So
Mm.
that didn't do him any good, right? So he couldn't even enjoy the $10,000. So that's where realistic optimism comes in. The realism part is, okay, bad things could happen. So I had to make sure I talked to my accountant. I filled out all the forms. I had answered the questions. I was, diligent in terms of following the rule, right? That kind of stuff. But then I have another tool that I use that I call the worry organizer. And the worry organizer is broken up into 5 categories. And what I tell people is write this down because then you only have to do it once. It takes a little more effort, but then you only do it once because worry is all up in our head. And like all we do is think about it, like, oh, yeah. And then what I find is half your energy is spent trying to remember what it is you're supposed to worry about. So when you write it down, then it's done. So when I looked at it, I was like, well, you just gave yourself a death sentence. Like, well, yeah, no wonder you're stressed out, right? So I
Yeah.
said, well, let me give you the right statistics. So if you have a family history of breast cancer, your chances are 15%. And if you find it early enough, your chances of survival are 85%. And you could see her body change, her physical appearance change because it was like she got her life back just by looking at the statistics differently. And then the fourth category is, well, what can I do to make it not happen? So we made sure she got breast exams and she did mammograms and we got BRCA genes and some other stuff. And then the last category, which is actually important, which is, well, what do I do if I get breast cancer? So we were like, okay, well, if you get breast cancer, well, let's make sure you know where the best breast cancer institutes are. Let's make sure your will's in place. Let's make sure your life insurance in place. Let's make sure all these things are in place. And here's the key is that we're planning, but without fear. So using the future is fine. It's when people have the fear reaction gets them in trouble. But if you can plan without fear, that's where our strength is. Yay, right? So when you put those tools together, then what I tell people is I want you to worry a little bit, but I want you to worry efficiently. And the worry organizer allows you to worry efficiently. So you're not waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning freaking out about something.
Yeah. So you have basically two main tools, right? You said realistic optimism, which is great, and then you have the worry organizer, and there were 5 steps in the worry
Yep.
organizer. Can you
Like, what
just
am I
read?
worried about? Why am I worried about it? How likely and how dangerous? And what can I do to make it not happen? And what can I do if it happens?
Perfect. That's awesome. Yeah, very, very effective. Something I'm thinking about is, have you heard of, I think it's from Dale Carnegie, very old book, How to Stop
Um,
Worrying and Start Living.
I did. Yes, I read that book.
Have you based on any of your tools of that and like other research as well?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like I've come up with my own sort of like model, but
Mm-hmm.
then as I read other books, then I integrate what they're saying into what I'm doing. And I find that it makes it much more objective. So one of the books I just
Mm,
finished reading was called what's it called? Integrated Family Systems, right?
mm,
And he talked about us having parts. And as I listened to what he was reading, as I was reading what his book was saying, I was like, oh, that actually makes sense. And now when I see patients, I go, so some part of you, the key is that we all have different parts. So like and
mm,
I think you were mentioning social anxiety, so then nobody can hurt us. And you're like, well, that works, but it also isolates you and makes you anxious and destroys. You end up sabotaging some relationship that might have been a good relationship because you were worried that you were going to get hurt. So when you then deal with these different parts, you can go, okay, look, there's a part of you that doesn't want to get hurt, and I get that. But let's see if we can find another way to protect you instead of just not having a relationship or breaking up a relationship. And so it gives you a fascinating tool to get through to some people's their source of their anxieties.
mm. Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's really important to kind of do this all of this work and go on podcasts and talk about this. And I think you have a very unique perspective. And based on your story, I would love to find out also more about how it was being a physician for 30 years and just that day-to-day life. Because I think not a lot of people get an insight onto like how that life really is. But besides that, I think it's very awesome that you've transitioned into going on podcasts and sharing all of this and helping us break the stigma of the mental health and all of that, right?
Yeah, well,
And
so one of the things that brought me to all this was a tool that I developed called stratospheres. And
mm,
stratospheres is like a Venn diagram. So with a Venn diagram, you have circles, like you might have a yellow circle and a red circle, but then you overlap them and you get orange. You're like, whoa, where'd that come from? So you get a new insight. And it's the same information, but now it's a new insight. So my tool is called stratospheres, and it gave me the model that said, here's our brain, and here's this new layer, and it's called the mind. And you go, whoa, because forever scientists and philosophers have been trying to figure out, like, what's the difference between an ape brain and a human brain. They're like, the anatomically there's not much difference, but obviously there's a huge difference in terms of what we can do and what we're capable of doing. And my model gives you the really clear answer, like, oh, it's because of stratospheres, because between a certain amount of quantity and a certain amount of interaction, you go from one layer and you add a layer. You cross a threshold and you add a layer. And in that new layer, there's all new um, all new skills. So it's not that the layer is accumulation